Welcome back to Learn English Naturally. Today, we're diving into a topic that's super important for anyone, you know, living in, traveling to, or just working in an English-speaking environment. We're talking banking.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to me how banking, even though it's all about numbers, really relies so much on specialized vocabulary.
It really does. I remember when I first moved abroad, even simple transactions felt kind of scary because I just didn't know the right words to use. So today we're going to try to break down those barriers, right? We'll give you the tools you need, the language tools to feel confident in any bank anywhere in the world.
Exactly. We'll cover everything from the basics, to those kind of oh no moments like disputing a charge. And we'll even sprinkle in, I think, some pretty interesting historical and cultural stuff along the way.
All right, so let's start with the essentials,
Yeah.
right? What are like the must-know banking terms, the ones everyone should really have in their vocabulary?
Well, first off, I think we got to talk about the different types of accounts, right?
Yeah.
So you got your checking account. Now, that's your everyday workhorse. It's what you'd use for frequent transactions, like paying bills or making purchases or getting your paycheck.
So that's the one I'd be using for like my daily coffee runs.
Precisely. Then you have your savings account. That one's more about, putting money aside for the future. Think of it like a safe haven for your money where it can maybe grow a little bit over time.
Right, right. And that growth part, that's where interest comes in, right?
Exactly. That's the bank basically rewarding you for, keeping your money with them.
Oh, that's good.
And while we're on the topic of money coming in, there's also direct deposit. That's when your employer electronically transfers your paycheck straight into your account.
Okay, yeah. Direct deposit, much easier. No more waiting for those paper checks.
Right. No more paper checks.
All right, so we've got our money in the account now. How do we actually move it around?
Well, you got a couple of options. You can deposit money, and that basically just means putting money into your account, right? It could be cash, a check, or even a transfer from another account.
Okay, okay. And then obviously we have withdrawing. That's taking money out of your account.
Yeah.
But, I've always wondered, is there a difference between saying like withdraw versus cash out?
That's a good question. In everyday banking, they're often used interchangeably, but cashing out can sometimes imply withdrawing all or most of your funds, especially if you're talking about investments.
Oh, interesting. So the context really matters.
Yeah.
Now, after all that depositing and withdrawing, how do we know how much money we actually have left?
Well, that's where your balance comes in. It's
Yeah.
just the total amount of money in your account at any given time.
Got it.
Makes sense,
But
right?
each time I deposit, withdraw, or transfer money, that creates a transaction, right? A record of the activity.
Right.
Speaking of transfers, can you explain that a little bit more? What exactly is a transfer?
Sure. A transfer is basically just how you move money between accounts. And those accounts could even be at different banks. Think of it like an electronic bridge for your money.
Okay, so we've covered those basics. Checking and savings accounts, deposits, withdrawals, balances, and transfers.
The building blocks.
Yeah, the building blocks. But what about some of the slightly more intimidating terms that we might run into,
Yeah.
Not the everyday stuff.
Let's tackle a couple that are important to at least understand, even if you don't use them in conversation all the time.
Yeah.
First one, overdraft.
Uh-oh.
This happens when you try to spend more money than you actually have in your account.
Oh, yeah, that dreaded insufficient funds message. So what happens if I, accidentally overdraft my account?
Well, it really depends on the bank and the specific circumstances.
Okay.
Some banks might just decline the transaction. That saves you the embarrassment. But it could also leave you in a bit of a bind. Other banks might actually allow the transaction to go through, but they'll charge you what's called an overdraft fee.
Yeah, those fees can be pretty sneaky. So it's good to be aware of them. Now, what about bank statements? I know those are important, but honestly, they can feel like just a jumble of numbers and codes.
I hear you. Basically, a bank statement is a summary of all your transactions over a certain period, usually a month. It breaks down all your deposits, withdrawals, transfers, and any fees you might have had.
So it's like a financial report card for my account.
Exactly.
And it's important to actually review those regularly, right?
Absolutely. It's your way to keep track of your spending, catch any errors, and just make sure everything's in order. Now, let's talk about a term that can be both exciting and confusing, interest rate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, interest rates can seem complicated, but they're really important for understanding how your money grows, especially in those savings accounts. It's basically the percentage the bank pays you for keeping your money with them.
Okay, that makes sense. But I've seen like different types of interest rates, like fixed and variable. What's the difference between those? Ah, good catch. A fixed interest rate stays the same for, however long you've deposited your money, which gives you predictable returns. But then on the other hand, a variable interest rate that can actually fluctuate with market conditions. So it could be higher or lower depending on what's going on in the economy.
So fixed is more predictable. Variable has the potential for like bigger gains, but also bigger losses.
You got it.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's shift gears a little bit. What about, those real life scenarios where we actually need to use these terms and phrases, like out in the wild?
Out in the wild. Okay, let's start with one of the most common ones, opening a bank account. Imagine you've just moved to a new city and you need to get set up with a local bank account. What's the first step? What do you do?
Well, I guess I'd walk into the bank and confidently say, I'd like to open a bank account.
Exactly. That's perfect. That's a great start. Then the bank teller might ask you, what type of account are you interested in? Checking or savings?
And that's where knowing the difference between those account types is super helpful, right? So I can explain like what my needs are and choose the right option for me.
Exactly. And if you're not sure, don't hesitate to ask questions. Something like, could you explain the difference between a checking and a savings account? That's totally fine. Everyone does it.
Makes sense. So after I've chosen my account type, then what?
Well, then they're going to ask for some documentation just to verify your identity and your address, basic stuff. Be prepared to show a valid ID, like a passport or a driver's license. And they might also ask for proof of residency, like a utility bill or something like that.
So asking what documents do I need to open an account beforehand, that's always a good idea to avoid any, surprises.
Absolutely. It shows you're prepared and it helps the whole process go much smoother. And if you want a debit card, which, let's face it, most people do these days, you can simply say, I'd like a debit card, please.
Okay, so now I've got my shiny new account and my debit card. Time to withdraw some cash. Can we walk through that scenario, both at the bank counter and at an ATM?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Let's say you're at the bank and you need to withdraw money from the teller. You'd go up to the counter and say something like, I'd like to withdraw some money from my account, please.
Okay, and then they'll probably ask for my ID again, right? Just to double check it's me.
Right, security first. And here's a tip. In some English-speaking countries, they might ask if you want small bills or large bills. This is basically referring to the denomination of the banknotes.
That's good to know. I remember I once had this funny experience where I received a huge stack of small bills because I didn't know how to specify what I wanted. It made my wallet bulge.
I can imagine. Yeah, don't be shy about asking for specific denominations if you have a preference. And if you want to check your remaining balance after you withdraw, you can just say, could you tell me my account balance, please?
Perfect. All right, now let's talk about ATMs. I mean, I know they're convenient, but I always get a little nervous using them, especially in a foreign country.
Yeah, I get it. It can feel kind of daunting, especially if you're not familiar with the interface or the language. But once you break it down, it's honestly pretty straightforward.
Okay, so first I insert my card, and then...
And then you'll usually be prompted to enter your PIN. That's your secret 4-digit code, right? And always make sure to shield the keypad when you're entering your PIN, just for security.
Got it. Then what?
Then the screen will usually show you a menu of options like withdraw, deposit, balance inquiry, things like that. You'd select withdraw in this case.
Okay, and then I just choose the amount I want to withdraw. Simple enough. But what if, I run into a problem? What if the machine eats my card or gives me the wrong amount of money?
Oh, that's when it's really important to know how to, report an issue. Most ATMs have a help button or a phone number you can call for assistance. So don't panic. Just explain the problem, calmly and clearly.
Good to know.
Yeah.
All right, now, what about those, truly dreaded situations where you find a charge in your account and you're just like, what is this? I don't recognize this at all.
Ah, yes. The mysterious charges. That's when knowing how to dispute a charge comes in handy. And you know what? In part 3, we'll delve into that whole process. We'll also explore some other essential banking scenarios, so stay tuned.
Welcome back to Learn English Naturally. We're wrapping up our deep dive into banking in English, and I gotta say, I'm feeling a lot more prepared to handle those everyday money situations now.
That's great to hear. Confidence really comes from knowledge, and we've definitely covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah, we have. From those basic terms checking accounts and deposits to more like nuanced concepts like interest rates and overdraft protection, we've really explored the language of banking.
We've really gotten into it. And we've even practiced some essential phrases for, opening an account, withdrawing money, using an APM.
Right. But before we wrap up, let's revisit that cliffhanger from the last part, disputing a charge. What exactly are the steps involved if we see something fishy on our bank statement?
All right, so first things first, don't panic. Most banks have very clear procedures for handling disputed charges. And, in a lot of English-speaking countries, consumer protection laws are there to really safeguard your rights.
Okay, that's good to know. That's reassuring. So what's the first step? Do I, call the bank? Do I storm into the branch? Do I send a carrier pigeon?
Well, carrier pigeons are generally frowned upon in modern banking, I think. You can usually report a disputed charge either by phone or through your bank's online platform, whatever's easier for you.
Okay, so let's say I call the bank. I'd say something like, "Hi, I've noticed a charge on my account that I don't recognize."
Yeah, exactly. Just like that.
Yeah.
And be prepared to provide specific details about the transaction, things like the date, the amount, the merchant name. The bank representative might say something like, "Can you please provide the transaction details so we can investigate?"
And I should have my bank statement handy
Yeah.
to reference all those details accurately.
Exactly. Having that bank statement in front of you is always a good idea. Once you've given them all the information, then you can formally ask to dispute the charge. You could say something like, "I believe this charge is unauthorized and I'd like to dispute it."
What happens after that? Do they just take my word for it, or do they, actually investigate?
Well, they'll typically launch an investigation to, double check and verify your claim. That might involve contacting the merchant or reviewing any documentation you can provide.
Okay. And if they find in my favor, then the charge is reversed and I get my money back.
That's usually how it goes, yeah. If the investigation confirms that the charge was unauthorized, you should get your money back. But it's super important to document all communication with the bank and keep records of any evidence that you send them.
Great advice. Knowing how to handle these situations definitely makes banking a lot less stressful.
Right. It's all about being prepared and having the right knowledge and language tools. And speaking of tools, let's do a quick recap of some of those key banking phrases we've learned today.
I'm all for it. Repetition is key to remembering new vocabulary.
For sure. So to open an account, you can walk up to the teller and confidently say, "I'd like to open a bank account."
And if I need to withdraw some cash, I can say, "I'd like to withdraw some money from my account, please."
Perfect. At the ATM, remember those prompts. Enter your PIN. Select a transaction. Would you like a receipt?
And if I spot a suspicious charge, I'm going to confidently say, "I believe this charge is unauthorized and I'd like to dispute it."
Excellent. You're well on your way to becoming a banking pro in English.
This has been such a helpful deep dive. I feel much more equipped to navigate the world of banking in English now.
I'm so glad to hear that. Remember, practice makes perfect, so don't be afraid to actually use these phrases in real-life situations.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on Learn English Naturally. Don't forget to subscribe and tune in for our next episode, where we'll be exploring another fascinating aspect of using English in everyday life. Until then, keep practicing and keep learning.